Trust in politics is broken. So can we get UK politics working again?
That was the last time we were happy. 2012.
I'm Beth Rigby, Sky's political editor. Join me every week with Labour's Jess Phillips and Conservative peer Ruth Davidson for some electoral dysfunction.
This idea of nuance has completely left politics.
Yeah. Together, we'll focus on the policies that could deliver political satisfaction. Follow Electoral Dysfunction wherever you get your podcasts.
We are hitting the ground running this week on the Sky News Daily. I'm Niall Paterson, and a little later we'll be heading to Windsor Castle to check in on the royal family, in particular Kate and Charles, after both were able to attend the Trooping the Colour at the weekend, despite their cancer diagnoses. We'll have much more on that and the Order of the Garter ceremony taking place today in part 2. But you may have noticed the general election is on the horizon and drawing closer all the time. So today it was Reform's chance to launch their manifesto. And bold would be one way to put it. Freezing all non-essential immigration, leaving the purview of the European Court of Human Rights, scrapping the two-child benefit cap, interest on student loans and TV licence fees. It is hugely ambitious and hugely expensive. An additional £141 billion of spending compared to Labour's 5 and the Tories' 13. As Sky's deputy political editor Sam Coates put to Nigel Farage during the manifesto launch Q&A, it is far higher than the promises made by even Liz Truss, and will therefore be seen by some as deeply unserious.
Is this radical fresh thinking on economics? Yes. Is it radical fresh thinking on constitutional change? Yes. Is it very radical change on the way our education system is currently bringing up our young children? Yes. Britain is broken. Britain needs reform. That's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do.
Our chief political correspondent is, of course, Jon Craig, and he joins us back on the podcast once again. Good to see you, Jon. We've both just been listening to Nigel Farage outlining his party's manifesto. What did we learn about reform?
We learned that they're out to attack Labour as well as the Conservatives. It was significant that he chose to launch his contract, as he calls it. He says manifestos are full of lies down in South Wales, in Labour's heartland. And he's certainly going after Labour as well as the Conservatives. In recent days, he's been talking about destroying the Conservatives. He didn't actually say he wanted to destroy Labour. He repeated what he said a number of times in recent days about how the election is over virtually, and that Sir Keir Starmer's going to be Prime Minister. But he had, as you might expect, some policies to the right of the Tories on immigration, a much tougher line there, and also one or two other policies which the Tories would not adopt, although some of their MPs would like to. For example, he would junk the British membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, which many Conservative MPs would like to, but the party establishment doesn't want to. That word establishment, of course, was a word that he used referring to both Labour and the Conservatives. I mean, you can't help thinking that a vote for reform is essentially a protest vote. They're not going to form a government, obviously. It's easy to snipe from the sidelines. But there's no doubt Mr Farage is a showman. It was a bravura performance, as you might expect, a speech given without notes or teleprompter, we're told.
As you say, Nigel Farage made a big deal today out of the fact that this was reform taking on Labour. It's not just about the Conservatives. Why are they doing that?
To get more votes, obviously. They're in Wales because Wales have the Labour Party's been in government in Wales now for many years, albeit from time to time in coalition with Plaid Cymru. But they want to pick up the votes of the disgruntled, those who feel disenfranchised. And if you're in South Wales, which is a Labour heartland, why not attack Labour there? As a general rule, it's always been assumed that for every 2 votes that Reform UK, or previously the Brexit Party, before that UKIP, take from the Conservatives, they take 1 from Labour. So it's all about maximising their vote. It's fertile territory for the Reform UK in South Wales in particular, and I dare say the rural bits of Wales as well.
None of which is to say, of course, that the Conservatives do not remain the biggest target for the Reform Party. I mean, just looking even at the launch itself today, union flags adorning the stage, a lighter shade of blue than we're perhaps used to from the Conservatives, but blue nonetheless, and all of this playing into this kind of post-election idea that Nigel Farage has, that he will somehow become the messiah of the centre-right?
Well, he said in one interview, didn't he, that he expected to be campaigning to become Prime Minister in 2029, the next general election after 2024. Bit fanciful, I think. But yes, he wants to take over the Tory party. He's talked about destroying the Tory party. I must admit, in the last couple of days, I've really enjoyed the spat between Mr Farage and Lord Cameron, which started when Lord Cameron was quite rude about him in an interview, and then Mr Farage hit back by accusing Mr Cameron of destroying the Tory party. What has really struck me in recent days, and I went to, obviously I was at the Sky News event in Grimsby on Wednesday, and then on Thursday I was at the latest seven-way debate. Now, Mr Farage, as he referred to a few times during his speech down in Merthyr Tydfil, took part in both those seven-way debates. What has struck me is apart from Lord Cameron, hardly any of the Tory top team has laid a glove or even tried to land some blows on Mr Farage. Most top Tories are pussyfooting around when it comes to Mr Farage. Now, there was a good moment in the Thursday night debate up in Salford. Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, they all got a question to ask one of their opponents, and Angela Rayner had a humdinger to Penny Mordaunt. Would you welcome Mr Farage into the Conservative Party? Well, there was a bit of political flirting there from Penny Mordaunt, because she talked about how she too was a Brexiteer, how she was in favour, if you can't reform European institutions, leaving them, a clear reference to the European Convention on Human Rights. It was only then that she accused Mr Farage of being a Labour enabler, as she put it.
Though I would point out, of course, that there are some within the Conservative Party who like Nigel Farage so much that they've popped him on their campaign literature while standing as Conservative MPs.
That was Dame Andrea Jenkins, who famously was the MP, the Tory, who beat Ed Balls in Morley and Atwood, as it was then called, back in 2015. Yes, you make my point for me, Neil. Many Tories are in love with Nigel Farage. And the other point, of course, is it's not just Conservative MPs. Conservative Party activists absolutely love him. There have been opinion polls when they're asked, who would you like to be the next leader of the Conservative Party? The activists say Nigel Farage, not one of the crop of Tories who will be left after the elections. And I'll tell you another theory of mine. The Reform UK have dumped their candidate in the constituency of Kemi Badenoch. Is that to give Kemi Badenoch, the darling of the Tory right, a free run? Well, call me a conspiracy theorist if you like, but OK, the guy...
John, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
come on, there's no proof
to be
for
fair,
this.
the guy did like some, I think it was the BNP back in 2010, I think it was, but they've dumped him, but it rather conveniently helps Kemi Badenoch.
This is possibly my point. The Reform Party have had a number of issues, putting it mildly, in fact, when it comes to the vetting of their candidates ahead of this general election and indeed by-elections in the past. It is a big problem for them, which I suppose serves as a reminder. Look, this is not one of the big parties. All that Nigel Farage is leading it, they don't have representation in Parliament that they have earned themselves. Indeed, Lee Anderson just simply crossed the floor. They are a small party with not particularly deep pockets, not huge resources when it comes to any of the aspects of politics, but we're obviously focusing on vetting. It is a reminder that they're not quite there yet. They're not the opposition.
Despite what Mr Farage is predicting.
Exactly.
Mr Farage was asked about this in one interview, and his answer was that all parties have had problems with candidates, and he also blamed the fact that they didn't have long to select their candidates because, of course, as Mr Farage and others have said, he wasn't expecting an election on July the 4th. I thought it was interesting when he, right at the beginning of his speech in Merthyr Tydfil, when he said, well, I never expected to be here leading the party and launching the party's campaign the way I am. And I thought to myself, yeah, right. I think he's been itching to come back, make a comeback, elbow Richard Tice out of the way and be front and centre of the campaign. But no doubt Mr Sunak thought, going for a quick early poll would wrong-foot his opponents, both the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, and indeed Reform. The early part of the campaign, of course, was all about trying to neutralise the Reform Party threat. It didn't work. In fact, it's backfired spectacularly. It's goaded Mr. Farage, as he puts it, to come out of retirement. I mean, he was all set to go off to America and do some quite well-paid work, so he says. But Reform are back. I mean, if Mr. Sunak thinks he could put Mr. Farage in his box, he's failed spectacularly, because as we've seen, the Reform UK's polling, according to opinion polls, well, they were on around about 10% before he came back. And there was that poll just before that ITV debate on Thursday night, put them on 19, almost double that, ahead of the Conservatives.
Thanks, John. We'll take a quick break afterwards. King Charles and Princess Kate attended Trooping the Colour this last weekend. What did we learn about how their cancer treatment is progressing? Back soon. Welcome back. Last Friday, in a frankly very personal statement, the Princess of Wales announced that she would be attending Trooping the Colour. Currently undergoing treatment for cancer, as indeed is her father-in-law, she was explicit that there are good days and bad. Certainly no one, including Kate herself, is suggesting she is now back to work full-time. She was absent from today's Order of the Garter ceremony at Windsor. Lots to discuss then with our royal correspondent, who of course is Rhiannon Mills, who joins us from outside at Windsor Castle. Good to see you, Rhiannon. Look, let's rewind, shall we, to that point just after, I should say, the publication of Friday's episode of the Daily Podcast, that we had that update from the Palace about Kate. And you know, whilst we were waiting and anticipating the news, plenty of people will have been crossing their fingers that it was that what we received. It was good news.
The royal family have had such a rough 6 months that I have to say, when I heard that there was going to be some kind of update, you can't help but fear the worst. But yeah, we did have that, again, really heartfelt and honest statement from Kate, incredibly open, again an openness that historically we've not had from members of the royal family, and I think a lot of it was positive news. The fact that she was confirming that she was going to be at Trooping the Colour, also that she is doing bits and pieces of work behind the scenes, and that she hopes to maybe go to some engagements as kind of the coming weeks go on, because it is busy this time of year for the royal family. As soon as she came out in that carriage, the photographers went mad, and of course her photograph was plastered right across all of the newspapers, not just in this country, but also around the world.
Yeah, and many would say only to be expected, given the role that she has and the concerns that there have been over her health. But for her to make that first public appearance since the announcement at Trooping the Colour, of all places, that official recognition, I believe, of the King's birthday, though he has another birthday somewhere else in the year. We'll park that one for the time being. But this is a big occasion in the royal calendar, isn't it?
Look, for most of us, a family gathering does not look like Trooping the Colour, but ultimately that's what it is.
I've had some parties.
But it is a massive family gathering for the royal family. It's a moment in the year where all of their diaries sort of come together, and they do get to spend a bit of time amongst each other and have a good catch up. And Kate, in her message, stressed that she was looking forward to being there amongst the family. Also, you have to remember that these moments when we see Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis on parade, as it were, are also quite rare. And so I think for her, she wanted to be there to be alongside the children, probably to make sure that they behaved. I think she wanted to be there as mum, because after all, Prince William, he rides on horseback in that parade, so he couldn't be with them.
Did we then, Rhiannon, have any sort of feedback on how the day had gone for Kate, and indeed what the likelihood is that we will be seeing her on public duties, on official duties anytime soon?
The only thing I was told was, we hope that the pictures do the talking. And I think the thing that really stood out to me was, as soon as she came out in that carriage, she wasn't trying to hide away, because actually it was a nightmare for the photographers. They hate covered coaches and covered carriages. They would far rather they had one of those open coaches that you can really see members of the royal family. It would have been easy for her to hide away a little bit in that coach, but she didn't. There are pictures of her literally looking down the barrel of those lenses and smiling. And so I think that also will be at play in the coming weeks and no doubt months when it's decided exactly what engagements she's going to be well enough to do. She still wants to put her family first. We're not going to see her at the Garter ceremony, we're told. Ascot is this week. We're unlikely to see her there. I wonder whether Wimbledon might be one where she might appear. We've also got the Japanese state visit coming up, so whether or not she accompanies William for that. But yeah, I think it's a guessing game.
And Rhiannon, we should not forget, of course, that part of the reason, as you've correctly mentioned, that the royal family has had a torrid time of late is not simply Kate's diagnosis, but that of the king as well. And on a day like Trooping the Colour, of course he is front and centre. How much more do we know about where his health is currently at? We shouldn't, again, forget the fact that we did see him turning up to those D-Day commemorations in Normandy.
I know that behind the scenes efforts are being made to sometimes adjust and change his programme of events. So, for example, when he went to France for D-Day, it was decided that it was best for him to spend the time with the veterans as opposed to going over to the big international event, which, of course, there's been so much discussion about with Rishi Sunak. But anyway, that's another story. But the King decided that Prince William should go to that international event because he didn't want to overdo it. I don't think he ever wants to get to the stage where he looks too unwell, and visibly we see him struggling, I suppose. But I think it has been astonishing to see just how much he has been doing ever since the doctors have given him the green light. I've been there at various engagements with him, and it's no exaggeration to say that he's been giddy to be back out, seeing people, talking to the public. But I think also it's those big ceremonial events that he knows as monarch he should be seen at front and centre. But standing outside Buckingham Palace in the drizzling rain, taking the salute, I couldn't help but think, do you know what? It's quite amazing. Yes, they're very privileged and they have amazing medical care, but it is quite something to see a man who is still having cancer treatment, making every effort to be there to kind of do his duty. And people I've spoken to at certain events have said, do you know what? He's a remarkable example of service when it comes to trying to literally soldier on through his own cancer treatment.
But hasn't there been, contained in some of the media coverage, perhaps a tone that the palace themselves have not sought? And correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but the way in which the House of Windsor has sold the King and the Princess of Wales getting back to work is all viewed through that prism of service. Others, however, in the media class, one article particularly described, Kate as not one of those lesser mortals who would have stayed at home. And I get it, they are suffering from cancer and, but they are incredibly privileged individuals with access to treatment that the likes of you and I probably couldn't get. This isn't the sort of tone that the palace was looking for, was it?
I think they'll be really uncomfortable with this idea that they are, when it comes to cancer, different from other people. Yes, they acknowledge that they are very fortunate that in both circumstances they were given a diagnosis and they have been able to, as it were, easily have the treatment. But I think in all of the messaging that you've heard, they've talked about how touched they've been that other people have shared their stories of going through cancer, how that has provided a sense of solace. Like, look, you saw the King, his first public engagement was meeting other cancer patients, and it was almost at times like the cameras weren't there. He was talking to one chap about cold cap therapy. He was holding the hands of others, saying God bless. And the feedback I got from that visit was that he felt like he was amongst people that he could really talk to. And what the palace have probably struggled a little bit with is ultimately this comparison that's been made between the King and the Princess. The King out and about a lot, the Princess, we've only just seen her at Trooping the Colour. And what they keep stressing is that everybody's cancer journeys are different. You had two people who, from the start, to kind of greater and lesser degrees, have wanted to share medical information, have wanted to share what they're going through. They want to continue to share their cancer journeys, especially as they know it's having a positive impact on charities and organisations, and they want to keep that going. And in a way, that is their way of serving, not saying we're better than anyone else, but by saying, look, we want to help in our own ways.
Kate's taking a well-deserved rest today, but the royal duties continue. Explain exactly why you're at Windsor Castle today, Rhiannon.
Yeah, so it's a special procession for the Order of the Garter, which is the oldest and the highest order of chivalry. You might have seen the pictures over the years. You have the royals and the 24 ladies and knights of the Garter processing down from the state apartments to St George's Chapel, which is the spiritual home of the Order of the Garter. There's 24 ladies and knights, and also various members of the royal family that you'll also see there as well, leading, of course, the King and the Queen alongside them. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, no Prince Andrew. So again, that's always a bit of a story that he's now left out because of him stepping away from public duties because of his links with Jeffrey Epstein. Prince William is going to be there. But yeah, the crowds always turn out for it. It's always kind of one of those big pageantry spectacles, another important part of the summer calendar.
Rhiannon, thank you. And that's your lot for today. We'll see you again tomorrow.